Welcome to the 21st Sports NFL Prediction Show, The Wedge. And in this show, we go over every game in the NFL schedule, as well as a weekly rewind of the week that was. But let's get started with our quick picks for week 2. Quick picks! First off, we got Thursday Night Football, the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Baltimore Ravens. I'm taking the Steelers. Then on Sunday at 1 o'clock, we got the Atlanta Falcons at the Cincinnati Bengals. I'm taking the Bengals. Then we got Miami Dolphins at the Buffalo Bills. Taking the Dolphins. Next is the New Orleans Saints at the Cleveland Browns. I'm taking the Saints. Then we have the Dallas Cowboys at the Tennessee Titans. I'm taking the Titans. Then we have the Detroit Lions at the Carolina Panthers. I'm taking the Lions. Then we have the New England Patriots at the Minnesota Vikings. I'm taking the Patriots. Then we have the Arizona Cardinals at the New York Giants. I'm taking the Cardinals. Then we have the Jacksonville Jaguars at the Washington Redskins. I'm taking the Jaguars. And that's the 1 o'clock games. Then at 4 o'clock, we have the St. Louis Rams at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm taking the Buccaneers. Then we have the Seattle Seahawks at the San Diego Chargers. I'm taking the Seahawks in that game. Then we have the Kansas City Chiefs at the Denver Broncos. I'm taking the Broncos. Then there's the New York Jets and the Green Bay Packers going at it in Lambeau. I'm taking the Packers in that one. Then there's the Houston Texans at the Oakland Raiders, and I'm taking the Texans. So those are the 4 o'clock games. Then Sunday Night Football at 8:30, we have the Chicago Bears at the San Francisco 49ers, and I'm taking the 49ers. Then on Monday Night Football, it's the Philadelphia Eagles at the Indianapolis Colts, and I'm going with the Colts. So those are my picks for week 2. Quick picks! Alright, so those were my quick picks for week 2. And now for the dreaded Pirate Redbeard. Quick picks!
Thursday Night Football. We got the Pittsburgh Steelers in Baltimore against the Ravens. I'm picking the Steelers. Sunday day, 1 o'clock. First game, we got Atlanta Falcons going against the Bengals in Cincinnati. Going with Atlanta. Next, you got the Dolphins going into Buffalo. I'm going with the Bills. Then you got New Orleans Saints going against the Cleveland Browns. I'm going with the Saints. Then you got the Dallas Cowboys going up against the Tennessee Titans. I'm going with the Titans. After that, Detroit Lions going against the Carolina Panthers. I'm going with the Lions. You got New England Patriots going against the Minnesota Vikings. I'm picking the Patriots. Next, you got Arizona Cardinals going against the New York Giants. I'm picking the Cardinals. And the last 1 o'clock game, Jacksonville Jaguars against the Washington Redskins. I'm picking the Jaguars. First 4 o'clock game, St. Louis Rams against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm going with the Buccaneers. And Seattle Seahawks going against the San Diego Chargers. I'm going with the Seahawks. Next, you got the Kansas City Chiefs against the Denver Broncos. Picking the Broncos. Then you got the New York Jets going to Green Bay against the Packers. Picking the Packers. Then the last 4 o'clock game, Houston Texans against the Oakland Raiders. I'm picking the Raiders. The Sunday night game, the Chicago Bears against the San Francisco 49ers. And I'm going with the 49ers. The Monday night game, it'll be a really good game. Philadelphia Eagles against the Indianapolis Colts. I'm going with the Eagles.
Quick picks! Now it's time for Fantasy Fortunes. Fantasy Fortunes. At quarterback, I'm going with Peyton Manning of the Broncos up against the Kansas City Chiefs. I also like Matthew Stafford of the Lions against the Carolina Panthers. At running back, I like Noshawn Moreno of the Miami Dolphins against the Buffalo Bills. I also like LaShawn McCoy of the Philadelphia Eagles against the Indianapolis Colts. At receiver, I got Calvin Johnson of the Detroit Lions up against the Carolina Panthers. Stafford and Johnson put up big points on Monday night, and there's no reason to think they won't do it again. I also like Antonio Brown of the Pittsburgh Steelers up against the Baltimore Ravens. At tight end, I like Greg Olsen of the Carolina Panthers up against the Detroit Lions. And at kicker, I like Mike Nugent of the Cincinnati Bengals up against the Atlanta Falcons. Last week, Nugent had 5 field goals just in the first half. And on defense, I like the Buccaneers, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, up against the St. Louis Rams. Fantasy Fortunes. Alright, so those are my fantasy picks for week 2. And now for the dreaded Pirate Redbeard. Fantasy Fortunes.
My picks at quarterback, I've got Matthew Stafford going against the Carolina Panthers. At second quarterback, I've got Peyton Manning going against the Kansas City Chiefs. Running back, I've got Mark Ingram of the Saints going against the Cleveland Browns. At second running back, I've got Sean Marino of the Dolphins going against the Bills. A receiver, I've got Calvin Johnson of the Lions going against the Carolina Panthers. At second receiver, I've got Michael Floyd of the Cardinals going against the New York Giants. Tight end, I've got Julius Thomas of the Broncos going against the Kansas City Chiefs. And kicker, I've got Mike Nugent from the Bengals going against the Atlanta Falcons. My defense, I'm going with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers against the St. Louis Rams.
Fantasy Fortunes. Now it's time for a new segment on our show, the Weekly Rewind, where we recap our quick picks and fantasy fortune picks from the week before. So last week in week 1, the first week of the season, and that's why this is the first time we're having this segment, we couldn't have had a weekly rewind in week 1. But here we are in week 2, and now we can do this segment where we go over what we did last week in our quick picks. And in the quick picks last week, I was 9-7. Which, it's above 500. It actually came down to that final game between San Diego and Arizona, and it was a 1-point game, and that was the difference for me personally in my quick picks from being 500 or above 500. They ended with 9-7 on the week. Last year in week 1, I was 13-3, so not quite as good of a showing this year in week 1 as last year, but I still beat them above 500. I'm glad to be above 500 and had more right than wrong. And with some of the picks, I'm actually kind of kicking myself over. And a few of them, they could have gone either way. We had a couple overtime games, and they came down to a field goal in overtime. That's really a toss-up. It's a coin flip. Can't really be upset with who you picked in those games, i.e. the Saints Falcons and the Bills Bears. Could have went either way. The ones I'm really kicking myself about is I can't believe I picked the Ravens over the Bengals. What was I thinking? Also, somewhat the Chiefs over the Titans, being that the Chiefs have so many, problems on offense, injury-wise, but still, you think the Chiefs are going to beat the Titans in Arrowhead. Same thing kind of goes for the Rams, Vikings, but who knew? I knew Cordero Patterson would have a good week. I had him in the fantasy, but who knew the Rams would really just fall apart the way they did last year without Bradford. They still were competitive, but then saw Shaun Hill go down in the first half, and Austin Davis played the second half. He actually seemed to do a little better, but Minnesota just kept pouring it on there with some big plays from their receiving core. Matt Castle had a heck of a game. I'm also kicking myself over I can't believe, what was I thinking? Cowboys over the Niners. Just thought the Niners defense was too banged up, but they showed that they have depth, and that their defense isn't just about, 1 or 2 players. It's a whole defensive unit. They play as a team, and they show that on Sunday is they really put a whooping on the Cowboys in Dallas. And of course, the Panthers-Bucks, but that game was close. It could have went either way, really, especially without Cam Newton. But, that's how it goes. There's a lot of parity in the NFL. and any team can win on any given Sunday, as the saying goes. So that's how I did in week 1 in my quick picks, 9 for 7, with a couple boneheaded picks. But moving forward, now we have more information. Now we know a little bit more about who's who. Still taking in the data though, is we still have to see a few more weeks of game footage before we can really tell who is the best teams and who are the rest. But we'll see how we do in week 2. As for the dreaded pirate Redbeard, he was 7 and 9 in week 1. So I was 9 and 7. He was 7 and 9. I'm sure he's also kicking himself for a couple of picks he made. But that is how it goes when predicting the NFL. Of course, I saw on ESPN there was a few people that were 15 and 1. So those guys, you got to give it up to them. That's they really know their football, or they really just got lucky. Either way, because not very many people. It was literally in the whole country only like 6 people that actually only got one wrong. So 6 or 7 people. So it shows you right there that the entire nation is watching the NFL and really doesn't know right at this moment who's who. But we're finding out who's who, and each week we will be bringing you all the latest updates to let you know and give you a better idea of what teams to watch in this season. Now let's check out the fantasy picks from week 1. And at quarterback had Peyton Manning. He put up some good points, 22 points. Also had Stafford. He put up a huge number, 29. He was just tearing it up. He was second only to Matt Ryan, so it was pretty good fantasy quarterbacks. Of course, then at running back, I had Jamal Charles, and he did not show up. Jamal Charles had just 2 points. That was like the big disappointment of my fantasy for week 1. LaShawn McCoy didn't put up quite the numbers I had hoped against Jacksonville. He only had 11 points. Now let's go to the receivers. Calvin Johnson, Megatron, huge night right there with Stafford. He had 28 points, just number 2 at his position, just tearing it up. Just freaking Johnson, tell you that just on that first drive already was crazy. The first 2 drives, Stafford and Johnson just getting touchdown, big plays, lots of yards. Stafford continued to rack up the yards. Also had Brandon Marshall, receiver. Not quite the points. He only had half as much as Johnson, a little less than half at 13 points. So actually, that's why he ain't in there for the next week for me. Greg Olsen, 14. I mean, that's pretty good for a tight end, obviously. Julius Thomas, right? But pretty good, though. I mean, 14's nice points out of the tight end position. Disappointment at kicker, Greg Zerline, only 6 points, those 2 field goals. He missed a 50-yarder, I think it was like a 56-yarder or something like that. He didn't really get a lot of opportunities. I thought he would have had more opportunities against Minnesota. So that fell flat right there. And then really the biggest disappointment, other than Jamal Charles, was the Kansas City Chiefs defense. They were just abysmal. I really was surprised there. I can't believe how bad they played. Of course, they were on the field for most of the game. Is a big part of that, but they really did not look like the unit from last year. They only had 3 points in week 1. So, I dropped them like a friggin' hot sack of potatoes. But, why would you drop a hot sack of potatoes? Would you put some butter and salt on them and knead them up? I mean, geez, Yeah, so that's the fantasy fortunes for week 1 in the rewind. And as you can see, I'm sticking with half the team, and I dropped about half the team in my week 2 fantasy fortunes. I dropped Jamal Charles, dropped Brandon Marshall, dropped Greg Zerline, dropped Kansas City's defense. You can go back and check out who I picked up. Now, as for the dreaded Pirate Redbeard, at quarterback, the dreaded Pirate Redbeard had Nick Foles. Foles got 20 points. He also had Peyton Manning, who had 22. Then at running back, he had DeMarco Murray from the Cowboys, who picked up 19 points in their loss. He also had Reggie Bush, who had 5 points in the Lions' victory there on Monday night. At receiver, he had Megatron Calvin Johnson, one of the top receivers. He had 28 points. Then he also had Cordero Patterson from the Minnesota Vikings, who had 18 points. Then at tight end, he had Jimmy Graham, who picked up 8 points in a somewhat disappointing outing for Graham in Week 1. At kicker, he had Steven Gostkowski from the Patriots, who picked up 8 points. Then on defense, he had the Philadelphia Eagles, who picked up 14 points. And now it's time for Upon Further Review.
Upon further review.
And in this edition of Upon Further Review, we'll be talking about the Thursday night game between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens. It says Thursday Night Football, September 11th at 8:30 p.m. You can catch that on the NFL Network. The Steelers and Ravens going at it in a battle between two AFC North rivals, and this is always a really good game. So far, we've seen in Week 1 that the Steelers came out really strong against the Browns in the first half as they went up 27-3. They let the Browns come back in it. They almost lost the game, but they won with a field goal on the very last play from regulation. So they ended up beating the Browns 30-27. And the Ravens, they went down to the Bengals in the first half, 15-0. The Bengals kicked 5 field goals. They held them out of the end zone. They made things interesting, but they were not able to come back as the Bengals held them off and were able to beat them pretty easily. So the Ravens really got beat up really bad by the Bengals. And even in that game, those 5 field goals in the first half could have just as easily been 5 touchdowns. And if it had been that, it would have been 35-0. And so the Ravens really were not looking good in Week 1. And now that we know that Ray Rice is never coming back, it's going to be all up to Forsett. Pierce seems to have injured himself, so the Ravens are going to really be struggling to pick up yards on the ground. It's going to all rely on Joe Flacco. Of course, that makes the Ravens one-dimensional. That makes the Steelers' job that much easier on defense. Of course, the Steelers showed that they've got quite the running game. This Le'Veon Bell picked up right where he left off last season and had a monster game. Antonio Brown also put up some really good numbers, so did Big Ben. As I said, the defense looked really good in the first half. Of course, they let the Browns back in the second, but I really think in this game, they're going to do pretty much the same thing. The Steelers should jump out to a quick early lead. They should go in the locker room up by a few scores, a couple touchdowns, maybe more. The Ravens, as they are apt to do, will probably mount a comeback late in the game, but it'll once again be too little too late, and the Steelers will win this one. I think they'll end up winning. It could be as much as 10 points, maybe as close as 3, but either way, I think it'll be kind of that type of game where the Steelers in the first half get a big lead. Then in the second half, the Ravens start to get something going. They start to make a comeback. It'll just be a matter of, how much do the Steelers let them come back is what's it going to be. Are they going to let them all the way back in and make it really exciting at the end like last week against Cleveland, or are they just going to let them back a little bit and then, win by a pretty comfortable margin? Either way, the Steelers, I see them winning this game, even though typically Baltimore plays them extremely tough in Baltimore. And that's why you kind of don't want to count them out. You got to give them a little chance in this game, but I'd say the odds are definitely against the Ravens, and that's why I got to go with the Steelers. So that's it for this edition of Upon Further Review, and that's it for this edition of The Wedge. Make sure to check back on the YouTube channel for more bonus editions of Upon Further Review, as I'll be going over all the games of the week. Just check out, you'll see it there. It'll be Upon Further Review, and you'll see the different games as they are approaching. So make sure to check back every day for more of those. Thanks for listening. Leave a comment below to let us know what you think, and I hope you enjoyed the show.